This story's called Twin. My name is Thomas Hughes, and I have lived a life marked by darkness and a twisted fate. I sit here on death row, convicted of a crime I did not commit, awaiting my execution. But the true horror of my story lies not in my conviction, but in the identity of a man who will carry out my execution. A man who shares my face, my blood, and my name. My tale begins in a small town where I lived with my identical twin brother, Timothy. We were inseparable, sharing not only our looks, but also our dreams and aspirations. Life had been uneventful until that fateful evening when our lives unraveled in a cruel twist of fate. It was a bitter winter night, and the town was shrouded in a thick blanket of snow. As I returned home from work, I found myself drawn into a nightmarish scene. A gruesome murder had taken place in our shared home. My heart pounded with dread as I entered the house, my brother's lifeless body lying in a pool of crimson, his face frozen in an expression of horror. The police arrived moments later, their suspicions immediately falling upon me. There was no evidence to suggest an intruder, and my fingerprints were on the murder weapon, a knife from our kitchen. I had no memory of the events that transpired that night, but the circumstantial evidence was damning. My identical appearance to the victim only fueled their belief in my guilt. I was arrested and tried for Timothy's murder. Despite my protest of innocence, the jury found me guilty and was sentenced to death. My only solace was the belief that justice would eventually prevail, that the true murderer would be brought to light. As the years passed on death row, my faith in justice waned. My pleas for re-examination of the evidence fell on deaf ears, and my execution date loomed ever closer. The darkness of despair threatened to consume me, but there was a glimmer of hope, a letter that arrived one fateful day. This letter bore no return address, only a cryptic message. I know the truth, and I will make them pay. I had no way of knowing who had sent it, but it was a lifeline in the abyss of my despair. Weeks went on as I waited for any sign of the mysterious sender's actions. Then, one evening, it happened. A news report detailing a shocking turn of events in our small town. A series of gruesome murders had begun, each victim killed in a manner early reminiscent of Timothy's death. Panic swept through the community as rumors of this serial killer ran rampant. The police were baffled by the new murders, their investigations yielding no leads. It was then I received another letter, this one more chilling than the last. Justice will be served, it read, and I couldn't help but wonder if the mysterious sender was the one responsible for these horrors. I was torn between hope and dread, torn between the possibility of my innocence being revealed and the terror of knowing that someone was exacting a gruesome revenge on our town. But as the body count rose, the town's fear intensified, and I began to suspect that the true murderer was closer than anyone could have imagined. The day of my execution drew near, and I had resigned myself to my fate. But as I was led to the execution chamber, a chilling realization washed over me. The man who stood there, clad in the uniform of an executioner, was none other than my identical twin, Timothy. His face was a mirror image of mine, and yet his eyes held a darkness. I had always believed in my innocence, but now, as I looked into the eyes of the man who was about to end my life, doubt crept in like a creeping shadow. You should have died that night, Timothy hissed, his voice barely more than a whisper. But you took my life, and now we'll take yours. guards seemed oblivious to the sinister truth that stood before them, and I was led to the execution chamber in a daze of disbelief as I was strapped into that cold, metal chair. Timothy's hand trembled with an eerie anticipation. But fate had one final twist in store for us. Just as Timothy reached for that switch that would end my life, the lights in the chamber flickered and died. Chaos erupted as the backup generators failed to kick in, plunging the room into darkness. In the ensuing confusion, I was unstrapped and whisked away by a mysterious figure who had infiltrated the prison. It was the same person who had sent the letters, the one who had promised to make him pay. As we escaped through the labyrinthine corridors, I couldn't help but wonder about the identity of my savior and the true natures of the horrors that unfolded. The murders in the town continued, each one bearing gruesome signature of Timothy's death. The police were no closer to solving the case, and the town lived in constant fear. Meanwhile, I remained a fugitive, forever marked as a murderer in the eyes of the law. As I reflected on the events that brought me to this point, I couldn't help but wonder if my brother's descent to the madness had been triggered by the trauma of that night, or if he had always harbored a darkness hidden beneath our shared facade. The true nature of his motives remained a mystery, and I was left to grapple with the horrifying knowledge that my identical twin had become the very embodiment of evil. In the end, I remain a man caught between the darkness of my past and the uncertainty of my future, haunted by the knowledge that the true horror of my story lay not in the crime for which I had been convicted, but in the twisted heart of the man who shared my face and name.